both lost as highly ranked teams, and Miami fell to 9. Georgia fell all the way to 12 after getting run over by Ole Miss. However, Tennessee handled their business and won against Mississippi State. BYU had to scratch and claw and be helped by a late call.
They got helped.
To beat Utah, a unranked team. And then Indiana had a 5-point win against a very dismal Michigan team this year. The controversy from this comes from the fact that Ward Manuel, who is the committee chair, their best win of the year is over a number 13 Boise State team, again, who's looking like the Group 5 representative. But Tennessee's best win is a bit against number 10 Alabama a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And yes, Tennessee does have one loss compared to no losses of these two other teams.
Tennessee's been better. It's plain and simple.
But the thing is, you had them ranked behind Tennessee last week, and now they suddenly jumped ahead of them with 2 mediocre wins. That doesn't make sense.
The setting the precedent here is awful. Let's also not forget Penn State at number 4. I mean, come on with this stuff. You know what, though? Here's the thing. We're going to learn a lot about these two teams in front of Tennessee very shortly here. Because Indiana, look, for as good as they've been all year, they haven't played anyone really legitimate. And their biggest game of the year is next week. And I know people are saying out there, oh, well, if Indiana loses that game, they'll be fine. They're going to still be in the playoff regardless. That might not be the case because if they get smacked in that game.
That's the thing. It depends on how you lose that game.
Yes. If you lose close and it's like you lose on a field goal, okay, keep them inside the top 12. But if you get smacked, I think the precedent has to be set, like, move them back.
Yeah, and how far? Like, again, Georgia dropped 9 spots after getting beat thoroughly by Ole Miss.
By 18. So it's like,
if you lose by 21 points to Ohio State, are you dropping like 12 or 13?
But the only difference is that, they would lose to number 2 Ohio State compared to, what was it, number 16 Ole Miss? Like, again, I just think a lot is going to change over these next few weeks. This season's been crazy, so.
I miss when we had a BCS formula. You could just punch numbers into a computer. It spit out rankings.
I agree.
That was the end-all, be-all. You couldn't argue with anyone, and, we just had to accept it. Because now you have the human element with all these athletic directors and people that are tied into respective universities and conferences that aren't going to admit it, but have biases. Because guess what? The more Big Ten teams that get into the college football playoff, the more it benefits Michigan. The more it benefits Ward Manuel as college football playoff committee chair, which again is why this is so convoluted that we let these people be the ones that decide who plays.
No, it's just, again, it is human nature to have biases, and I think I just don't understand what the problem was with the old way. Obviously, people want to be mad at someone, but again, the computer, for as much as I do not like the way computers handle things sometimes, it makes more sense. It creates less issues now.
Well, one thing we're not upset about is South Carolina men picking up another one last night over Towson at Colonial Life Arena. We'll dive into that, let you hear what Coach Paris had to say after the victory. Coming up next, it is The Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Belcher along with you on your Tuesday here in the game. Tyler Head once again telling you about our friends over at Canty Foundation Specialist. I tell you about it all the time, but I'll remind you once again, you need to be on the lookout for things around your home that don't quite look right. Things like cracks in your exterior brick, cracks in walls or above windows and door frames, doors or windows that might be sticking, uneven or bouncy floors, or cracks over your garage door. If you have any of these issues with your home, you could have serious foundation problems. That's where our friends over at Canty Foundation Specialists come in. You can go online and schedule an appointment today at cantycanfix.com. They'll send you a professional out to your home to evaluate one of these odd things going on and see what needs to be done to your home's foundation so you and your family can live comfortably going forward. Again, you can go online to schedule an appointment today at cantycanfix.com for our friends over at Canty Foundation Specialist.
back down floor, and Pringle rejects a shot from Christian May. Gamecocks run ahead to Murray Boyles.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Veltri along with you here on your Tuesday on the game. That was called last night. Derek Scott on the Gamecocks radio network of CMB throwing it down, helping lead South Carolina to the 80-54 win over Towson. We'll get to the specifics of the game in a moment, but good Lord, Pat Adams, get over yourself. I think you know when he is your assigned head referee for a game, you're going to have a lot of whistles. But my goodness, there's no reason this game should have taken over 2 hours last night.
It was absolutely absurd. Just to kind of put it into perspective of what Tyler's talking about, Towson took 6 free throws in the first half, 23 in the second half. Absolutely absurd. Even South Carolina had 30 free throws attempts last night. Like, come on, like, get real.
And like, look, there was about 8 minutes to go, and I was doing some work, and I had the game on, so I was kind of going back and forth. At about that 8-minute mark, there was a long delay, and it was about what somebody had said. And they assessed technicals. One of them was on the coach for Towson. What are we doing here?
I don't know, man. It was like the first half was like flying by, and it's like, ooh, we're going to get out of here nice and quick.
Good pace. And again, it was a lopsided game for the most part.
It was. Like, again, it delayed the inevitable, and it just made things a lot longer. Like, I didn't get out of there till like 10:30 last night. It's like, man, I could have been gone so much quicker. But you know what? When I heard it was Pat Adams, I'm like, I've heard the stories about it. I don't remember him reffing a game that I was at specifically, unless I'm misremembering, but my gosh, man. Come on. I see what people are talking about.
Yeah, it was not great. South Carolina did walk away with the 26-point victory, though, and much like we saw on Friday night against South Carolina State, rebounding after that loss against North Florida last week, they just looked a lot more crisp, a lot more efficient. Still not perfect. Some things to work on, but definitely playing a little more fluidly than they did at the beginning of the season.
No, this was definitely the type of game they needed after what they've done the first 2 games of the year, and now they're going into Indiana where things are obviously going to pick up a little bit, and that's why this game was so important for South Carolina, to have that momentum, that confidence that they can go out there and play well. And I think for them, it started with a good start in this game. Like, they played really well on defense out of the gate. Like, Towson didn't hit a three-pointer till like 14 minutes into the game, and then offensively you were able to take a big lead and kind of roll from there. So I think overall, you played really well in the first half. You'd like to be a lot better in the second and play that complete game. But overall, you got to be happy with what you saw from this team.
Let's hear a little bit of what Coach Pierce had to say after the game. Cut number 24 here, Dave, talking about his team's effort last night.
All right. Thought we had a tremendous team effort against a team that I think is going to win a lot of games. I mean, they won 20 games last year. They got the bulk of their team back. They're tough and hard-nosed. They're aggressive to the basket. They're well coached. They know what their identity is, and they're going to win a bunch of games. So those are the kind of teams that you like to play early on this season and see what you're made of and see where you are. So I felt really good about the effort that we had against that team. Of course, we played well, a couple guys in particular. But just in general, I thought our effort was really good, especially on the defensive side. We had a stretch there in the first half. I thought we were really getting some things done. And I thought as help defenders, one, we stayed in front of the ball as individual defenders better, but then as help defenders, I thought we were more willing to get into some spots that really helped our overall defense. But really good win early in the season against a team that's experienced and is tough.
And he mentioned this is a team in Towson that's projected to be at the top of their conference in the CAA, so certainly not a slouch by any means. And like you said, their team took a lot of shots from the outside. South Carolina's defensive presence down low really prevented them from wanting to drive to the basket. And again, South Carolina was able to really kind of establish a comfortable lead early on in that game and maintain that throughout the rest of the night. Story coming away from the game, Colin Murray Boyles, 27 points and just 1 rebound shy of getting a double-double. As again, he's doing exactly exactly what we thought he was going to be doing in year number 2, is emerging as the true star of this team.
Yeah, the front court last night in general was a lot better. Like, CMB balled out last night. I like the aggression he played with, especially going to the rim and making some plays. Like, he played very physical in the paint last night, and that is exactly what you want from a guy like that who can go out there and score any given night. And then Nick Pringle, I mean, he had a much better game yesterday. Like, he almost had a double-double as well with 9 rebounds and 15 points. We had been waiting to see him kind of come along and play well, and that's exactly what we saw last night. So you pair those two together. I think it was like 42 and 18 last night. You get that. I mean, it won't happen every night, but you get that more times than not. That's going to create stress on defenses to figure out, okay, do we want to stop these two guys, or do we want to try to stop the outside shooters like Jacoby Wright, Jamari Thomas, etc.?
Yeah, and speaking of Jacoby Wright, I really think South Carolina has settled in on what their starting five is going to be with Wright in the lineup at that starting spot compared to Zach Davis, who started game number 1 against Zach Davis. Good on the defensive side of the ball, but Jacoby Wright gives you more opportunities to score, which it does seem like this offense flows a whole lot better with him out there, and that I imagine is going to be the starting five going forward.
I would have to say so. I'm looking to see the other guards kind of have more shots, make more shots, I would say. You know, Jacoby's been great so far, but the guys around him at those guard spots, like Zach Davis, like you brought up, he's great defensively, but his shot really hasn't come along yet. Miles Stude's been so-so. I think we're waiting for him to score more points. Jamari Thomas had been pretty good through the first 2 games, but last night he only had 1 shot and missed it. So I think you need more from the guards to kind of make it feel like a real threat in the paint and on the outside, but Jacoby for sure should be a starter going forward regardless.
One thing that is concerning me about this team, and it really seems to be at the start of halves, and it happened in both halves last night, the early turnovers. Like, it's just, it seems like they can't kind of fall into a rhythm until they get a few minutes into each half, which, again, playing teams like Towson and South Carolina State, that's not really a problem. But when you get into conference play, that's something that could come back to bite you, where you could find yourself in a pretty deep hole against the Kentuckys or the Texas or something like that if you can't come out of the gate, more efficient.
It wasn't even just the early turnovers in that first half. It was like the second half was so much more sloppy last night. And I think they had like 10 turnovers in the second half, which is a really insane number considering South Carolina was up by, I think, like 20 points for most of that second half. So, look, they obviously need to play a lot cleaner basketball. I think it comes down to, okay, slowing the game down a little bit. I think that's what they were so good at last year, was playing at their pace and letting the other teams make mistakes. We saw a little bit of that last night with Towson making a lot of miscues, but South Carolina, it didn't cost them last night. They have 15 turnovers again. They will be, paying the price against a team like Indiana, who will definitely be able to take advantage.
And that game against Indiana coming up on Saturday out there at Assembly Hall. By the way, you can hear that game on our sister station, ESPN 1320 WISW, as you run into the rare instance of men's basketball and football playing at the same time. And I believe this game on TV is on Peacock. So if you're watching at home, you don't even have the option of like easily alternating between channels. You have to go in one app, out of another app, into another app that, you maybe just record that one or you can watch things on demand on Peacock after the fact, I guess.
Yeah, that's going to work for everyone, but I'm trying to figure out on Gamecock Central's end of, because I'm not covering the game on Saturday because I have football.
Right.
I'm trying to figure out, okay, do I have Peacock? Can I share it with my coworker? What do I do here? Can we just have basketball on regular television? Like, put it on NBC. They're going to put it on Peacock. I don't. It is what it is.
Well, and Saturday, Indiana's football team is off. So you're going to have a pretty rowdy crowd there that's not distracted by what's going on with football either.
That's going to be a really good crowd. I wish I was out there. Never been. Would love to go. But you know what? If South Carolina can get a win on Saturday, that is a big statement about this team early in the year.
Well, and considering the fact that, again, you have a quad 4 loss, which North Florida did beat Georgia Tech. They lost to Georgia last night, but still a team that's not expected to be all that great overall this season. That loss is going to hang over you this entire season.
Winning.
But if you're able to go out there and beat a team like Indiana,
keep winning.
That at least gives you a Q1 or a Q1 win that you can hold in the bank too.
Exactly. Just keep winning. Keep winning. Don't have any more Q4 losses. Play well enough in SEC play, and you will be fine.
Again, that game coming up on Saturday, happening the same time as South Carolina and Missouri on the Gridiron over at Williams-Brice Stadium. Start taking a look at the Missouri Tigers. Let's hear Coach Beamer as well as Coach Drinkwitz had to say ahead of Saturday's matchup. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Belcher along with you here in your Wednesday on the game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyrod and Jack Belcher along with you here on your Tuesday on the game. We're going to start laying the wood here in just a second. South Carolina getting set to take on Missouri this upcoming weekend. Missouri is the surprise in a lot of ways last year in the SEC. 10-win year, one of the best years in Missouri history. Drinkwitz, who had been a perennially 500 coach leading up into last year at Missouri, took the team a lot farther than people expected, and they came into this year as one of the dark horse playoff candidates, and they had a very favorable schedule.
Yeah.
And up to this point, they only have 2 losses, but those 2 losses to Alabama and A&M lost by combined 75-10. So when they play good teams, they get completely run over in those games. And I know Drinkwitz said the other day they're still alive for the playoff. I think that's out the window for them personally. That being said, they are a team that does have a lot of talent and is certainly capable of giving you a tough game. That being said, the way I look at this, Carolina shouldn't have a problem this weekend.
They definitely shouldn't, especially with the way South Carolina's been playing. If you told me 3 weeks ago, or asked me this question 3 weeks ago, I would have said, yeah, South Carolina might have a tough time beating Missouri because they haven't beaten them in so long. But again, there's a reason why they're double-digit favorites in this game. It is no accident. People are seeing how good this team has been playing. With that defense, they've been able to match up well against any quarterback they put up against them. So I think South Carolina just needs to continue to play solid defense and let the offense go to work because I think they really have been able to mesh well together.
Let's get into a little bit of what Coach Beamer had to say about this matchup yesterday. Start off with cut number 2 here, Dave. This is Coach Beamer talking about Missouri typically being the more physical team in this matchup.
I would say they've kicked our butts physically, just to be completely frank. If you go back and look at sack totals, our ability to sack their quarterback and their ability to put pressure on our quarterback, you look at rushing yardage plus our ability to stop the run, we've been nowhere near good enough. And it's not just O-line, D-line, but we haven't been good enough on both sides of the ball to do the things that we need to do to win the football games. You guys have heard me talk about what we call our plan to win, the 6 things that we have to do every single Saturday in order to win football games. So if you take those 6 things and multiply them by 3, that's 18 things over the last 3 years. And I went back and looked yesterday. We've lost 15 of those in our 3 games against Missouri. So the only things that we've done well to win football games is one year we outscored them in the 4th quarter, but it was because we were behind. One year we had less penalties than they did. And one year we did a decent job of stopping the run in regards to how many yards per carry they have. So we've just got to perform better. We haven't done a good enough job, and give Missouri credit for that. They've been better, and a lot of that has been our inability offensively to run the football against these guys.
When you look back at the games that Coach Beamer teams have played against Missouri, Missouri is averaging 3.75 sacks per game, including 5 last year against Spencer Rattler. On the flip side of things, they're only allowing about less than 1 sack per game against South Carolina's defensive front, which we think should change this year. They are averaging 178 rush yards per game on the ground, including Cody Schrader just running all over South Carolina last year. And then they're only allowing South Carolina to run for an average of 68 yards per game in these matchups since Beamer's been the head coach. As Beamer alluded to, they are dominating the line of scrimmage in this matchup.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's been a reason why Missouri's been so well against South Carolina, like literally for the reasons you just pointed out. Like, again, they haven't been able to run the football. Missouri's dominated the line of scrimmage. South Carolina's been able to do those things, though, this year. So can it translate over to this game that you're at home? It's an afternoon game, but it's really going to be at night considering how dark it gets early here around halftime. The advantage is in South Carolina's favor. It's going to be a great crowd this weekend. There's just a lot that, I think at this point you kind of still feel like in the back of your mind, if you've watched South Carolina football for so long, it's like, okay, the letdown is coming, right? That's always what South Carolina fans have been used to. Am I wrong?
Right.
But I think this time it's like, if the letdown would have happened, it would have happened last week, but it didn't. And South Carolina's been playing a lot better football, and I think it's going to continue this weekend. They just got to play their style and not let get away from them essentially.
Well, and again, this is in recent years the rivalry that Missouri has dominated with a lot of wins by double digit. A couple years ago, he had 3-point loss in Como back in 2021, a 7-point loss back in 2020. But the other years, 20-point loss in 2019, a 13-point loss 2 years ago. Obviously, the game last year where you couldn't do anything but kick field goals in that game, and you're trying to get over this hump of not only beating Missouri but beating Drinkwitz, because you've lost to him.
Yeah.
Every time you've played him, whether he be the coach at Missouri or when he was at Appalachian State as well. So there's sometimes as a program, you just have trouble with a particular coach. And for whatever reason, it is Eli Drinkwitz always coming to the table with something better than what South Carolina has. But again, having watched Missouri play multiple times this year, including that chaotic fiasco against Oklahoma the other night where they needed a scoop and score touchdown to win in the final couple of seconds there, Carolina's way better than this team.
Oh, most definitely. Like, again, that is clearly evident. Put them up against these common opponents. Like, yes, South Carolina lost to Alabama, but Missouri got smoked by Alabama. And then Missouri lost to A&M by a lot. So it's like South Carolina should be able to win this matchup, not for the common opponent's sake, but the fact that they're a better football team right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we'll see what happens on Saturday. But when you have the pass rush that South Carolina has against a not phenomenal offensive line in Missouri and a backup quarterback in Drew Pine, who we'll get into a little bit more here in a second, I fully expect South Carolina to get home. I fully expect South Carolina to wreak havoc and rattle them and prevent what has been a less than stellar offense from doing too much.
No, exactly. Like, again, as long as South Carolina plays the way they have been, which is great defense, an offense that is really coming along and doing a lot of different things, you can win this game no problem. But again, Missouri, South Carolina hasn't beaten them in so long. Is that going to be the case again this year? We'll just have to find out.
Well, we'll have to see if Carolina can get that coveted Mayor's Cup.
Yeah.
We've all
2018 is the last time they won this game.
So longing after. Which trophy is more meaningless, the Mayor's Cup or the Bonham Trophy?
Oh, the Bonham Trophy. Because honestly, even after they beat A&M, I haven't seen the trophy at all.
That was what I was talking about with Terry yesterday. Like typically, like the Big Ten has all those trophy games, right? Little Brown Jug, Paul Bunyan's axe, Floyd of Rosendale, all those kind of things. And, you'll see it on the sidelines during the game, and the sideline reporter will go over there and do a stand-up in front of it and talk about the history and where it came from and all that kind of stuff. And, the Bonham Trophy was nowhere to be found against A&M the other week.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know what happened.
Well, I know there's one version of it at the Alamo that stays at the Alamo.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's a second version that goes with the team, but and you've been in the football facility more than I have.
Yeah.
I don't imagine that's on display anywhere.
Probably not. Like, again, I haven't been around the facility to the point where I'm seeing trophy cases and stuff. Right. But again, it's like, I don't know.
Maybe it's a paperweight on Coach Beamer's desk.
Probably.
We'll take a look at this quarterback matchup and just who exactly is going to be starting for Missouri coming up on Saturday. It is tomorrow, Thursday. We're going to be taking over Gold Line Framing, 511 12th Street in West Columbia. Come by and see us from 9 until noon. Then, as always, at 6 o'clock, you got Carolina Calls with Coach Beamer and Todd Ellis. That'll be an abbreviated one, it'll be a full one, and women's basketball will be on our sister station for their pregame, ESPN 1320, which tip off on the game at 7 o'clock as they take on Coppin State. Come back, wrap up hour number 1 of The Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Felcher along with you here near Tuesday on the game.
yeah, we have a lot of confidence in Drew, and whoever gives us the best opportunity to win is who we're going to play. And yeah, we won't know anything on Brady till later in the week. But I would anticipate Drew's going to, we'll prepare for Drew to be the starter.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler and Jack Belcher along with you on your Wednesday here in the game. Get my days confused there. That was Eli Drinkwitz yesterday talking to the media about his plans for quarterback. And today being Wednesday, we'll get the first injury report coming out a little bit later on today to see where everybody stands as far as their status for this weekend. It doesn't sound like he has the most confidence in Brady Cook, who's been hurt since he really got hurt in the Auburn game. He left, came back, helped Missouri win that game, then got hurt again against Alabama, and has not been seen on the field since. Drew Pine, the backup quarterback, former Notre Dame quarterback, has been starting since then, and there's definitely a significant difference between when Brady Cook's on the field and when Drew Pine is. And I give credit, Drew Pine did help them with their comeback win last week. He was not the necessarily catalyst for it. A great catch by, I think it was Theo Weiss on a long throw that ended up being a huge part in them getting a late touchdown there. But he's got the reins as of right now, and seems like that's who they're likely going to be rolling with this weekend.
Yeah, that former Arizona State quarterback.
So he would have started the Gator Bowl against Carolina 2 years ago. But he already transferred, and that's why Tyler Buckner started that game.
No, great. So South Carolina lost a little lacrosse player is what I'm hearing. But look, I don't think it really even matters who starts at quarterback for Missouri. Not in the sense that like obviously Brady Cook's a better quarterback than Drew Pine. That's not necessarily what I think South Carolina is totally focused in on. Like obviously they're preparing for both guys, but it's more so who's catching passes. It's Theo Weiss and Luther Burden, two really good receivers. And yeah, they don't have Cody Schrader anymore, but those two guys, they can beat you single-handedly. And so Shane Beamer's message yesterday was, all right, those guys are going to get their catches. You have to limit their yardage. And I think South Carolina's done a pretty good job of doing that over the years against Burden and Weiss. But I feel like in this game particularly, to win, you got to be able to slow those guys down.
Well, and that's kind of the interesting thing when you look at the numbers this year. And Luther Burden, again, is respected as one of the best wide receivers in the nation. Certainly was that a year ago. His numbers are good, but they're not like, oh my God, amazing good. I mean, he had 117 yards and a touchdown against Boston College earlier on this year, but like Oklahoma, 5 catches, 55 yards, 3 yards against Alabama, 49 yards against Auburn. Like these aren't the numbers that you necessarily expect from Luther Burden compared to what we've seen out of him in years past, and Theo Weiss isn't a whole lot better overall this season. He had $149 against Buffalo, but that's Buffalo. Like neither one of these guys has jumped off the page and had those oh my God amazing games as of yet.
But they're capable of it.
They are capable of it, which is the scary thing.
That's the thing. And look, so that's why I feel like, okay, like you put Drew Pine out there. Okay, he had 3 touchdowns the other day, and he was able to connect with Theo Weiss. So it's like, okay, like he's fine there. But Brady Cook, it's like the same deal. It's like, okay, like whoever you put at quarterback, they're going to be throwing the ball to those guys. It's just a matter of, okay, can you force pressure on both of them because they're good quarterbacks? Brady Cook's obviously better than Pine, but can you stop those receivers is the big question. I feel like that is where the biggest matchup is this weekend is not so much, obviously line of scrimmage is a huge battle every game, but in coverage, DBs against these receivers, who locks them up?
Yeah, we'll see. One thing, obviously, the fact that South Carolina has good pass rush and is going to be able to affect likely Drew Pine on Saturday, I think does go a long way. When you look at the numbers nationally, Missouri has only allowed 20 sacks on the year, which is about middle of the road in terms of FBS. However, 19 of those sacks have been surrendered in SEC play so far. So as they've gone up against better defensive fronts, they've really struggled quite a bit, which again gives you a lot of confidence that South Carolina is going to be able to go out there and wreak havoc on Saturday.
Most definitely. We hear this same thing every week that South Carolina, like these teams haven't faced a defense like South Carolina, and I feel like we can say the same thing for Missouri. In those 2 games they lost, obviously A&M and Alabama, they both have really solid guys, and Alabama's defense has been great this year, but they've been a lot better, and A&M has been pretty solid outside of the Carolina game. So for South Carolina, it's just Continue to do what you do defensively, wreak havoc, and then let your DBs go out there and make plays just like they have been.
Absolutely, and again, we'll see what the ultimate injury report ends up being coming up later today for both sides as well, and we'll see what the status of DeAndre Jules as well as Nick Barrett's going to be for South Carolina, as those two guys obviously missed the game last week against Vanderbilt, though that didn't end up really making all that much of a difference, as Carolina still was able to get good penetration, hold the run game at bay for the most part. But one thing that is, I think, pretty significant when you look at the injury report, not only when it comes to the status of Brady Cook, but, and this was announced yesterday by Eli Drinkwitz, Connor Tollison, their starting center, is out. Drew Heismeyer, a fifth-year senior with 0 starts, going to be making the start this weekend against South Carolina. And again, the center is the most important spot on that offensive line. That is an area that I think Carolina's got a good opportunity to exploit this weekend.
That's a huge deal. Losing your starting center. It's one thing to lose a guard or a tackle, but when you lose essentially your captain of the offensive line, the center is in most cases, especially as a starter, that's a big deal. So South Carolina, especially if you get Jules back, which it sounds like, we'll see what happens with the availability report, but from the way Shane was talking, it seems like they could. That is only going to add to what you have in the middle on your defensive line.
And we'll also have to see what the status of DQ Smith is as well. Of course,
That's
he was
right.
Ruled out right before the game on Saturday, and Peyton Williams went out there and
he played well.
Played a really strong game, but certainly would love to have DQ Smith back this weekend, especially considering the caliber of wide receiver you're going to be facing against Missouri on Saturday.
Yeah, look, it's going to be a really tough challenge, but I think South Carolina has proven time and time again they can go out there and play well against anyone. I fully expect them to do the same this weekend, even though they haven't beaten Missouri in so long.
We'll see what happens there. Saturday, we get coverage started at 11 a.m. with Gamecocks Game Day, sponsored by Lex Medical Orthopedics. From the party lot of Sound Images, myself and Terry Ford getting you set for the 4:15 kick between Missouri and South Carolina, which you can listen to right here on the game. 1 hour in the books. Hour number 2 coming up next. Demetri Ravenos checking in with me for a few minutes. Talk a little bit of Georgia and Tennessee, one of the more intriguing games of the weekend across the SEC and college football, as hour number 2 of the Extra Point rolls along here on your Wednesday on the game.
Hey, I want to tell you about our show sponsor, PL Wine Pool and Spa. They're an award-winning swimming pool builder that's been in the business for 25 years with more than 40 years of pool construction experience. They service the entire Midlands area, whether you're looking for weekly cleaning maintenance or chlorine to salt conversion with services like safety cover installs and safety fence installs. You can check out all their offerings at the showroom in Lexington, South Carolina, and you can talk to their experts about any and everything you might need. Their retail store is located at 5541 Sunset Boulevard in Lexington. Again, that is 5541 Sunset Boulevard, and you can find that out in Lexington. You can also check them out online at plwinepools.com. Again, that is plwinepools.com. So I want to thank PL Wine Pool and Spa for being a wonderful sponsor of 107.5 The Game.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on your Wednesday on the Game. Bring in our guy, Dimitri Ravenos, as we do each and every Wednesday. Talk a little bit of, let's see here, college football as we coming off of, hold on, getting a little bit of a double audio here, Dave, trying to figure that out real quick. As we get through what happened last night with the college football playoff top 25, South Carolina coming in at number 21 overall. And Dimitri, as we bring you in here, I'll first ask your surprise level of what happened on Saturday night between between Alabama and LSU in Baton Rouge.
This game.
Yeah, that is kind of the weird thing when you go back and look. When you go back and look at what happened between, A&M and LSU, where Marcel Reed really seemed to catch them by surprise, and then you go to what happened on Saturday night, where it was just quarterback power, seemingly, or the RPO with Jalen Milroe that kept getting them to the tune of 4 touchdowns, and again another very comfortable win by Alabama to, in a lot of ways, maybe kind of remove LSU from any playoff hopes. Yeah, and again, Alabama finds themselves in the top 10 when it comes to college football playoff rankings. The latest ones that came out last night, I touched on this a little bit earlier. The controversy and conversation around this edition of the college football playoff rankings revolves around Indiana and BYU, despite the fact they both beat unranked teams, jumping over Tennessee, who they themselves beat an unranked team, despite the fact they have the best win out of that entire group, as we continue to see the flaws of having this committee of folks decide who the best teams in the country are. Fair. Yeah, no, certainly so. Huge matchup this weekend with what's happening down in Athens between Tennessee and Georgia. And we'll kind of dive into that a little bit here, as that will be a 12-7 matchup, Georgia at 12 and Tennessee at 7. And the hot rumor going around, started by none other than Chris Felica, the former producer from ESPN, now at Fox Sports, that Nico Iamaleava may not actually be good to go this weekend, which is a huge impact on this matchup if true.
Because I think that as Nico has come back to since week 3 and go.
Yeah, and like you said, the strength of this Tennessee team is certainly its defense, and that pass rush is one of the better ones in the country. And we saw how much Georgia and Carson Beck struggled last week against what Ole Miss brought to the table, and you wouldn't think it'd be too much different this weekend against Tennessee. I keep going back to, and having watched Kirby's teams up close for years and years and years, they always seem to step up in the big games. No, they didn't do it this past weekend, but there is something to playing a game at home and knowing that their back is up against the wall that I just naturally assume they're going to come out with a better version of themselves this past weekend. But maybe the identity of this team is they're not able to do that this year. We don't know, but they certainly have enough talent to be able to compete. We'll just see if they show up this weekend compared to last weekend. Yeah. Yeah, and again, they're coming into this game certainly with their back up against the wall because they have no more margin for error. And as it stands right now, when you look at the latest college football playoff top 25 projections, they would be the first team out at number 12 because Boise State, being the Group 5 representative, would jump over them. So any more losses this year, whether it be to this team, to Georgia Tech in a couple weeks, would eliminate them from playoff contention, unless just a ton of chaos ensues, which I don't necessarily think it will to that degree. So how do they play with their back up against the wall? How do they play with no margin for error? Because they're a team that just only a handful of weeks back was thought of as the number one team in the country and a shoe-in for the college ball playoff, and now they're in a different regard. And it makes you wonder as well, how much farther do you go with Carson Beck? And again, the protection has not been great up front, but he's also making a lot of mistakes, and his receivers are dropping passes as well. But, you've got a Jaden Rashada as a backup. You've got a highly touted guy in Gunnar Stockton people thought highly of coming out of high school. I'm surprised at this point they have not tried somebody else. You know what I mean? Because it's not just, I had a bad game against Alabama, in that first half and shook that off. No, it's been a consistent thing in SEC play, 10 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. There's clearly a problem with Beck, and I don't know, even if you do make the playoff, if he's the guy that you can count on riding with if you're going to go anywhere in it. Yeah. Yeah, and look, if Georgia's going to amount to anything this season, it's going to be off of the strength of what their defense can do. And again, they got pushed around quite a bit last week against Ole Miss, but they didn't get completely run over. They were still in the game in the fourth quarter. The offense just couldn't do enough to get past the 50-yard line, really, without throwing an interception. So the defense is something that you can fall back on. And again, this is a Tennessee team coming into this weekend that we've seen countless time and time again struggle to put up any points in the first half of this game. So I don't expect either team to run away with this by any means. I think it will be one way or the other a one-score game late in the fourth quarter. Yeah. Well, Well, and I think you also have to look at it from the standpoint of, for Georgia, this is a de facto elimination game for them. But for Tennessee, especially when you bake in the factor of the quarterback injury potentially being a huge deal in this game, a second loss wouldn't kill them necessarily. Yeah, they'd probably drop a few spots. But if you say, okay, well, this team's definitely better with Nico, assuming he's going to come back in these next couple weeks, they still would have all the goals in front of them, not only making potentially the SEC championship game, but maybe making the playoff as well. Yeah, so that first of all, obviously goes to the head-to-head record, and again, you have a lot of teams that did not end up playing each other, and then it goes to record against common opponents, which that in and of itself is this whole another math equation that I don't know if the SEC thought they were going to be dealing with this kind of a mess in year one of this divisionless format, but there's a very realistic chance we could be talking about this over the next couple weeks as well. Yeah. Look, I've been a believer for a long time that all divisions in or all conferences in college football should have a uniform 9-game standard. That way, it's easy to, compare across all of them, and it makes scheduling a whole lot easier as well. Because right now, the SEC and the ACC have 4 non-con games, while the Big Ten, the Big 12 have 3. And again, it gives you an extra data point for trying to filter out these things as we expand these conferences out to 16 and 18 and potentially 20 here in the future as well to alleviate some of these head-scratching tiebreakers we're going to have to deal with here soon. It looks like. Well, the biggest question is, will it make more money, and will ESPN be willing to pay for it, is what it all boils down to, unfortunately. He's Demetri Ravanos, joining me each and every Wednesday to talk some college football. I'm going to expand on this race for Atlanta in the SEC and what all those tiebreakers are a little bit. Coming up next is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday here on The Game. Welcome back into the Extra Point. It's all right along with you on your Wednesday here on the game. Reminder, Lori Lisa Special Teams Contest rolls on to another week. $1,000 up for grabs this weekend as the Gamecocks take on the Missouri Tigers. Go online to 1075thegame.com and register if you've not already for the Lawyer Lisa Special Teams Contest. And, of course, if no Special Teams touchdown happens this weekend, it rolls over to $1,100 as the Gamecocks take on Wofford coming up next weekend. Dimitri and I were talking about this a little bit at the end of that last segment, but I want to expand on it. Do you have any idea who's going to be playing in Atlanta here in a couple weeks for the SEC Championship game? Because it is wide the heck open as of right now. I know we all kind of looked at the beginning of the year and saw what would be some very easy scenarios, saying, okay, well, it's probably going to be some combination of Georgia, Texas, or Alabama being in the championship game, maybe Ole Miss in there as well. But as of right now, if the championship game were tomorrow, you'd have Tennessee and Texas A&M. Both teams at 5-1 overall. Now they're ahead because Texas played one less conference game as of right now, but still, the way the current standings show, those would be the two teams in the championship game. And if both teams did end up winning out, then that'd still be the championship game because that would mean that Texas A&M would end up beating Texas here in a couple weeks, and that means Tennessee would beat Georgia's upcoming weekend, and that would resolve itself pretty easily. However, this has the opportunity to get very, very messy over the course of the next couple of weeks. In fact, if I'm doing my math correctly, because right now you have 3 teams, 1 loss, that being Tennessee, Texas A&M, and Texas. Then Georgia starts the run of teams with 2 losses, them, Ole Miss, Alabama, Missouri, and LSU. You could have potentially 8 teams in the SEC with 2 conference losses. And that would mean that Tennessee would be lose to Georgia this weekend, and Texas could lose to Arkansas this weekend. Then A&M themselves could end up, beating Texas at the end of the year while losing to Auburn here in a couple weeks. Again, not the most likely scenarios, but those scenarios do exist. And with how chaotic this college football season has been so far, I don't think we can necessarily rule out anything as of yet. And in fact, if things get odd enough and Tennessee does end up losing to Georgia, then we could run into a scenario where we could have Texas A&M and Texas playing back-to-back weeks. Now, again, there's a lot of dominoes that have fall between now and then, but that's a very plausible scenario where they could play one week, have a winner, and then play again the next week to see who gets the automatic bid in the upcoming college football playoff. And I alluded to this a moment ago. For those that don't remember, we have a list of tiebreakers on how these things are going to be decided should we have teams tied atop the SEC, which that's the only place they would use these things for. They're not going to, try and use tiebreakers to decide who's 5th and 6th, because ultimately that doesn't matter a whole lot in the grand scheme of things, even when it comes to seeding in the college football playoff. But as far as deciding who goes to Atlanta, the tiebreakers are as follows: head-to-head among tied teams. So if 2 teams play each other with the same record, guess what? The winning team gets the nod. Pretty easy to figure out there. If that's not enough, they go to the record against common opponents among the tied teams. So what X amount of teams do these 2 teams both play, and how do they fare against them? Then you have the record against the highest-placed opponent among the tied teams. So essentially taking a look at the conference standings, see how you fared against teams and where they fall in the SEC. And then you have combined winning percentage of all conference opponents for each team, which is the 4th criteria, and one that hopefully we don't have to get down to, because that could get really, really messy by saying, okay, essentially what's your strength of schedule within the conference compared to what the team you're going up against is, which that's an instance where I look at a team like Texas, who's been criticized for how light their schedule is in the SEC outside of playing Georgia and now Texas A&M, who's going to be a tough matchup coming up here in a couple weeks. But I would be willing to think that their conference winning percentage is a bit on the lower end compared to what other teams in the conference face, like a Georgia, like a Tennessee, and teams like that, obviously. So that's 4th criteria if it does indeed end up coming to that. My question is, as we're trying to figure out who's going to be in Atlanta, how valuable is playing in that conference championship game? And I know. Obviously, if you win the game, you get an automatic bye into the quarterfinal second round of the new 12-team college football playoff. But what is the value of being a 2-loss team in the SEC, knowing you're going to be in the playoff, and getting to sit out and then host a first-round conference game? I think that's pretty good. In fact, that is, to me, more beneficial than playing the conference championship game and losing it, and I could say this with a lot of confidence for the SEC and probably the Big Ten as well. I can't say the same thing about the ACC and the Big 12 because those might end up being one-bid leagues when it's all said and done. But if you're good enough to be in the SEC championship game, which likely means you only have 1 or 2 losses, I think, or I feel like, losing that game should not bump you out of the playoffs in favor of a team that did sit at home. So, assuming that's true, then both those teams get in. One team gets the bye. One team will go in as an at-large to either host or, go on the road for a first-round game. And then you're the third and fourth teams, maybe even a fifth team, depending on how things shake out, are likely in as well. So, again, what's the greater value? Playing the 13th game and losing, knowing that you're going to be in regardless and, putting an extra game under schedule that didn't end up benefiting you at the end of the day, or just sitting at home for that first weekend in December, saying, okay, we know we're in because, I'm 8th or whatever, and we're not going to fall out of the top 11 by being idle this week. And then knowing, okay, we got to play a first-round game, but, hey, we've got a good chance to get this thing at home. I think that's more beneficial to me, right? Yes, the value of getting a first-round bye is huge. And waiting in whatever bowl destination, which for the SEC would be the Sugar Bowl, given the bowl tie-ins, to see whoever wins the first-round game and ends up getting paired with you. It's going to be interesting to see. And again, this is a 12-team playoff format that is only temporary for right now, only for these first 2 years, and then we'll see if it gets restructured in 2026. I'm interested to see how the teams that play that extra game in a conference championship and still make the playoff fair compared to the teams that sat at home in the first week in December and then played a first-round game. Because that could be a big indicator on how the future of this format ends up going and what the future of conference championship games actually might end up being. So we'll see what happens. Speaking of formats, speaking of championships, we'll have our last edition of Talking Racing with Jen Jensen coming up next, as there is controversy afoot after NASCAR season concluded on Sunday at the Phoenix Raceway with Joey Logano claiming the championship. We'll dive into that and what the future of NASCAR's championship format could be coming up next. It is the Extra Point. It's our head along with you on your Wednesday here on The Game. Tyrad here once again telling you about Underdog Fantasy. If you've not signed up for Underdog, what are you waiting for? With their pick'em game, you can win up to 1,000 times your money just by choosing higher or lower on player stats with things like passing yards, receiving yards, touchdowns, three-pointers, assists, and more. You think LeBron James will have higher than 39.5 in combined stats tonight versus Memphis? Hop on Underdog and place an entry. Underdog puts the power to cash out in your hands. Now you can either keep riding with your entry or tap win now and cash out whenever you want. This week on Underdog, I've got Jaden Daniels lower than half an interception coming up tomorrow night on Thursday Night Football. Discounts can also give you adjusted projections on certain player stats to give you a better shot at picking up a big victory. Download the app and sign up with promo code THEGAME1075 and deposit now to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. That's promo code THEGAME1075. Must be 18 or older and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org.
This is Blaney's final shot at it. He goes up high. There's traffic low. Joey Logano steps into history. He's a 3-time Cup Series champion.
Nobody better. Nobody.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on your Wednesday on the Game. That was the call on NBC on Sunday as Joe Logano did indeed wrap up his third career NASCAR Cup Series championship by winning the race, just out-battling teammate Ryan Blaney in those last couple laps to win the 2024 NASCAR Cup Series championship. Joining me for the last edition of this segment for the year, Jen Jensen from the early game. As Jen, it has been a crazy year nonetheless, and we were treated to a champion that nobody had coming into the playoffs. I'll say that much.
No, absolutely. It was, if at the beginning of the year, if you had said Logano was going to win the championship, I would have absolutely said, you sure about that? Because I just didn't see that one happening.
And look, you got to give credit to him. He and Paul Wolf obviously understood what they needed to do. Won races at the right time, played fuel strategy really well at Las Vegas as they did at Nashville back in the summer to qualify for the playoffs, and have put the best car on the track when they needed to on Sunday at Phoenix. And hats off to Team Penske as well. 3 championships in the next gen era with 2 with Joe Logano and then the 1 with Ryan Blaney last year. They certainly heat up at the right time of the year to be able to put together these championship runs.
Yeah, no, they absolutely do. And really, you kind of wondered if maybe Byron wasn't going to be in there with the fuel strategy that they were trying. And I thought, well, maybe we're going to finally get Hendrick back in there. But no, like you said, Team Penske just kind of dominated, and it looked like no matter what, it was going to be a Penske win, which was really fun. Yeah,
Christopher Bell maybe had a little bit better car, but got mired back in traffic, which allowed Logano and Blaney to kind of settle that among themselves. Byron finished a distant third in the race, then Tyler Reddick came on the 6th spot as the last member of that championship 4. And, purely from a one-race standpoint, this was entertaining, and we did get a good battle to the very end, but even going into the weekend, well before we got to this weekend, quite frankly, there's been a lot of discussion these past couple of weeks about the legitimacy of this format. And when you look at Joey Logano, who, let's remember, was eliminated at the end of the round of 12. He was not in the round of 8 until Alex Bowman got disqualified at the end of the Roval race. He then, Logano went on to win at Vegas, which locked him in to the championship 4, and then proceeded to win the race on Sunday to take home the championship. There's a lot of conversation about if this is indeed the best way to decide the champion going forward or not.
Yeah, I mean, because if you look at it really before the playoffs, Logano had only won 1 race. He won in Nashville. So was his record really the one that you would have expected to come away with being the championship winner? And I just question, I don't know, we'll get into this, because the more that we see the season play out and see those who performed even at a higher level, that they were not even in contention for the championship at the end. It just makes it very interesting.
So Joey Logano is statistically the worst champion in NASCAR history when it comes to average finishing position, has the fewest amount of top 5s, and I believe the fewest amount of top 10s as well. As again, he really did not do a whole lot in the regular season, and on points wouldn't have been in without that victory. And again, it's a don't hate the player, hate the game scenario. They did what was asked of them this year to go out there and win the championship. I'm not knocking them for that, but I do think it's an opportunity for NASCAR to look in the mirror and say, hey, we had somebody that was able to exploit the system. Is this what we really want to do going forward?
Well, when you start looking at those things, like Christopher Bell had the most top 10s. Larson and Bell had the most top 5s. Larson had the most wins. Larson had the most poles, the most laps led. So for him not to be in the Final 4, it seems very odd. And like you said, Logano really historically, his record hasn't been that great. But you're right. He knows how to dial it in at the right time. So I agree. It's the system that I think at this point now, and I believe NASCAR has said they are now starting to become more open to making changes for, like I said, would it be 26?
Yeah, so there's an article by Adam Stern of the Sports Business Journal yesterday that noted that people within the industry in NASCAR are looking at possible tweaks for 2025 with potential major overhauls coming as soon as 2026. Not guaranteeing those things are going to happen, but it is certainly on the table as NASCAR is listening to the feedback of fans. And I kind of want to go back in time a little bit here because NASCAR's been operating with a postseason format since 2004. The original iteration of the chase with 10 drivers over 10 races, first won by Kurt Busch, and continued on through 2013, where Jimmy Johnson won 6 of those titles. They decided to change it up and wanted to put more of an emphasis on winning and creating quote-unquote moments, Game 7 moments, as they like to call it, with the drama of elimination races and a one-race winner-take-all scenario. And one thing that frustrates me when we have these conversations about this format and about what NASCAR should do is they always like to go back to stick and ball references, and Steve Phelps, the president of NASCAR, said this on Friday. The best team doesn't always win the Super Bowl in the NFL. The best team doesn't always win the World Series in baseball, NBA, so on and so forth. And what frustrates me about that is the original championship format, which comprised the entire season, and whoever had the most points at the end of the final race won the championship. And sometimes that was locked up a couple races beforehand, like Matt Kenseth winning at one race before the season ended back in 2003, the last year they had the full season format. Is you had conditioned your fans for over 60 years to believe in a format that represented an entire season and crowned the best overall driver at the end of that season. And then you suddenly changed it up and said, well, now it's going to be about winning a couple races at the right time. And I hate that we keep going back to these stick and ball references because, again, the history of the sport always had a representative champion of who was truly the best at the end of the entire year.
Right. Well, and you look at, those who are playing in the playoffs in, like, say, football, they have the best records. That's how they're getting in. It's not anything else but that. Yes, it is based on wins to a point, but it's really whatever whose records are best. So why wouldn't that still translate to something like NASCAR, where if your record is best, you've accumulated the most points, then, yeah, you're treated to the opportunity to be in that. I'm okay with the final 10 races or however many races and having 10 drivers or 12 drivers or whatever the case may be, being in there for the final.
And I think we also have to understand, and they said this as well on Friday in their State of the Sport address, like the playoffs themselves are not going anywhere. There is going to be a postseason format that is always going to be present in NASCAR, and I'm okay with that. I get why it was created as a way to create more intrigue in the final 10 races of the season, trying to compete with the NFL and all that stuff. That's fine. I just think we need to refine the way that we do it. And one thing that sticks out a lot, and another big point of conversation, is the one race winner take all. And again, in other sports, again, hate making these references, in one sport, yes, they're determined in head-to-head contests between two teams. When it comes to racing, though, there's so many variables of what can happen in one race. And I look at the Xfinity Series. Justin Allgaier got taken out in practice on Friday through no fault of his own, had to go to a backup car, and thankfully for him, he did end up winning the championship, but he could have easily lost the championship because the quality of his backup car was not as good as his primary car through no fault of his own with that practice crash on Friday. So I just think having a one-race championship with, accidents, with things happening on pit road, with what lane you choose on the restart, so many things that should not determine what a champion is that unfortunately in the past 10 years have all been baked in.
Yep, 100%. It's a matter of, and because there's such volatility within the racing, and like you said, somebody can be taken out, and then their chances are just completely gone in the blink of an eye. I think more and more it just needs to be a culmination of quality win or quality performance throughout the year. The team that has performed the best has given the best car to their driver, the driver who can, make things happen and knows how to get those stage points. I'm good with all of the stage points and those types of things. Great. Keep all that in. But I'm with you. I think it needs to be a culmination of successes throughout the season.
I've been a big advocate for kind of flipping the playoffs. Instead of having a one-race finale, I think the first race, operating as kind of a de facto wild card round, should only be one race, which right now would be the Southern 500 at Darlington. We say, okay, if you're one of these teams from 13th to 16th, you've got one race to either win or point yourself into that top 12 to continue on. I think that creates urgency and allows those guys one opportunity to get themselves in position to continue on. And then you have 3 race rounds the rest of the way, including a Final Four, which would be contested over 3 races at 3 different racetracks. And the winner, whoever has the most points at the end of that final round ends up being your champion. I think we'd be crowning far more legitimate champions than what we're doing right now.
I like that strategy, again, because it's based on performance, not just luck, and happen to dial it in at the right time. You're still having to have consistent performance on a more long-term basis. I like that.
And look,
so why don't you give him a call?
Yeah, I know. I'll try and put in my 2 cents if I can. And look, we both care about this sport a lot, and we want to see it continue to thrive. And I think the legitimacy of NASCAR has been hurt a lot by this championship format because it's not respected outside. It's not respected inside the bubble of NASCAR, but certainly not respected outside the bubble because, again, for the longest time, NASCAR champions were revered as the best overall at the end of the season. Now that's not the case. So I hope we can get back to some form of that within the structure of what the playoffs can be, and we'll see what they decide to do over the next basically 3 months of the offseason.
I think they're going to be very busy because there have been several rules that need to be addressed, things that have happened at some of the races as far as, when your car is technically disqualified, if somebody has to go in just because they have a flat tire, you're disqualified. Like those types of things that were causing issues during the race. And again, that could have impacted somebody from winning a race to be able to move on. What if that had happened to Logano in a race or something like that? He wouldn't have been able to continue. So I think there's several rules packages that they're going to have to be looking at this season because we just had an awful lot of controversy this season.
And that's the unfortunate part. Again, we're talking about this format and the controversy that happened in the playoffs. We had a lot of really great racing this year. We had a ton of close finishes. We had a ton of really, really good races overall, and it's unfortunate that it's being clouded by things not happening on the racetrack.
Yeah, and while some controversy is fun, you want it to be more between drivers or teammates or those types of things. You're not looking for that to be NASCAR's involvement. So those, I do agree that I think for the legitimacy of the sport, but also just for the pure enjoyment from the fans and to keep them coming back, we really need them to address some of that.
We'll certainly see what happens. It's going to be a long off season, but Daytona will be here hopefully before we know it, and excited to dive back into it come February.
I'm looking forward to it. I always hate the off season, but it's fun to see what's going to come out, and we'll be ready in February, like you said, before we know it.
Absolutely. Enjoyed our conversations this season. Look forward to doing it again next year, Jen.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tyler.
Come back, wrap up today's edition of The Extra Point. What if I told you Ohio State fans were jealous of South Carolina fans for one specific reason? I'll tell you what that is coming up next. Is The Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday here on The Game. Welcome back into the Extra Points Hour. Head along with you on your Wednesday here on the game. Reminder, tomorrow, myself, Wes, and Chris, we're going to be out at Gold Line Framing in West Columbia, 511 12th Street. Come on and see us as we talk all things South Carolina, Missouri, getting you set for the big matchup this upcoming weekend. Then tomorrow night, 6 o'clock, as always, Carolina Calls right here on the game with Shane Beamer and Todd Ellis. That will lead right into tip-off of women's basketball taking on Coppin State. Pre-game for that will start on our sister station, ESPN 1320, while Carolina Calls is wrapping up with Coach Beamer. So a very busy Thursday night coming up tomorrow right here on the game. Mentioned a moment ago, Ohio State, one of the top teams in college football this year with still all their goals in front of them of winning a national championship. Why would fans of the Buckeyes be jealous of South Carolina fans? Well, one reason, home games at night, or just in general, games played after 3:30 in the afternoon. Because if you've been following the past couple days on Twitter, there's been a lot of conversation about Big Noon Kickoff, which is, of course, the 12 o'clock time slot on Fox Sports that routinely matches up or routinely features the biggest game in the Big Ten, which a lot of the times ends up including Ohio State. And it's gotten to the point now where Ohio State is going to end the 2024 regular season playing 6 straight noon kickoffs, 4 of those being at home. The next one being this weekend against Northwestern. Or excuse me, that one's going to be at Wrigley Field. Next weekend against Indiana, which as of right now is set for to be a top 5 matchup. And then closing out the regular season, as they've done the past couple years, taking on Michigan, this time at home on Fox as well. So Fox did something that I guess is surprising, had not been done before, but they jumped on a time slot that ultimately was not being utilized to its fullest extent. Because typically, the biggest matchups in college football were saved for late afternoon. So think of the 3:30 CBS window for the SEC all those years that gave them their biggest game of the week, and then nighttime games. So, if the ACC back when Clemson and Florida State were both good, they'd be a 2 and a 6 matchup. That game would be at 7:30 or 8 o'clock on ABC, and the whole entire nation would be watching. And a lot of the time, the noon window in college football was relatively uneventful as far as like huge big name top ranked teams playing other big name top ranked teams. And Fox said, well, why don't we utilize this window ourselves? Put the big teams on it where you don't have a lot of competition and rake in the ratings, which they've been doing. And I tip my hat to them for doing that. What it's done, unfortunately, though, is neuter the atmosphere for a lot of these places in the Big Ten, which again they have the exclusive rights to, or excuse me, the Fox has the exclusive rights with the Big Ten for this noon window, so they get pick of the litter, and then CBS and NBC get the other games in the 3:30 and then in the later windows. And the complaint coming from Ohio State fans as well as Penn State fans as well is the fact that they don't get the biggest games at night where the crowd and the atmosphere can be at a higher level than it would be at noon. Think about the fact that a couple weeks ago, Ohio State came to Penn State and it wasn't a whiteout game. There's a lot of white in the crowd, but it was not the same energy, and they have to deem one game a year the whiteout game. It was not the same energy it could have been should that game have kicked off at, say, 7:30 or whatever. Ratings monster with those two teams playing at noon, as most of us were probably watching that game. But for the fans at Penn State, they wondered what could have been, and I don't know if that's going to help their team win or not, if that game was played later in the day and you got to have the energy and excitement of a full-day build and all that kind of stuff. And I can sympathize with them on that, right? Like, personally, for me, sitting here in SEC country with a team and a program in South Carolina that does get to play night games thanks to the SEC's exclusive deal with, with ESPN, I can understand that because, and look, we've all been to noon games. It's sleepy. It's not the most electric atmosphere outside when game day comes to town and, you have all the hype around that, but I can understand where those fans are coming from. And for the viewing experience as well, you can tell it's not quite the same as what it would be at a night game or something like that. Here's the thing, and Joel Klatt, who of course does color commentary on Big Noon Saturdays with Gus Johnson, came to the defense, rightfully so, of his employer, Fox Sports, and, noted the positives for why this is being done to, fill in a window that wasn't being utilized, the viewership and the revenue and all that kind of stuff that's been generated from Fox Sports, which tells me it's not going to be changing anytime soon. Because here's the thing, people in corporate offices that wear suits aren't concerned about what the fans of a program think, because they know regardless you're going to watch it. And it's going to drive up ratings and revenue and all that kind of stuff. So they're not the least bit concerned, but I do understand the sympathies of those fans that do feel like they are being neutered a bit when it comes to the experience of game days. And for Ohio State to play 6 straight games with a noon window kickoff feels very bizarre. But again, I don't see that changing anytime soon with the way the current television network is structured. Be thankful we're an SEC country where, again, ESPN now has exclusive rights and can put the better games in those later windows, like we're going to get once again this weekend with Georgia and Tennessee playing at 7:30 on ABC. That'll do it for today's edition of The Extra Point. Coming up next, Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Wednesday here on The Game.
Been enjoying all the college football action out at my home, and you can do the same. My setup was provided by Integrated Media. They mounted my TV, make sure I got our internet signal straight. Upstairs, another mounted TV, got the video games on a switcher for the kids. The adults, if we ever get time, might dabble in that a little bit. They can do any of that at your home, plus way more. You don't have to use the big box stores if you're looking for a new television, if you want something mounted, if you're looking for Sonos wireless speakers, a sound bar, man cave upgrade, outdoor space, patio, screen porch. They can do it all for you. Go check out some inspiration photos, get some ideas of some cool stuff you could do this season. Integrated Media Columbia on Instagram or on Facebook. Give Michael and Nathan, their team at Integrated Media, a call. 803-948-8327. Local service. They do a great job. IntegratedMediaInc.com.
11 o'clock on your Wednesday morning. Welcome in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. It's our head West Mitchell, Chris Clark, along with you. A couple days away from Carolina getting back in action, taking on Missouri. Carolina will do that as a ranked team in the latest college football playoff top 25, coming in at number 21 last night, the second highest rated team with 3 losses behind behind Louisville, and one spot ahead of LSU, who did come in here and have the victory against South Carolina earlier on this season. But as we expected, guys, South Carolina did make their way into the top 25.
Yeah, I think we were all curious to see just how much the committee would reward South Carolina. And, you know, you look at this thing, and to me, obviously, like, I don't even think, like, I think we're at the point where we can talk about, hey, could Carolina get in? Is that a possibility? Yes. Now, if we get to the point of starting to do all these different scenarios and, hey, this team loses, that team wins, this team loses, I think, maybe if you're into that, go for it. But, for the most part, I think that is kind of a exercise in futility. I will say this, though. Like, let's enjoy the fact that, for one, if you're in this top 25, it means that your program, that your team is pretty good, and that's being recognized. Like, I don't think that's the end-all, be-all. Like, you don't look at this, if you're Shane Beamer and company, and this was something he talked about yesterday, you don't look at this as, hey, we've arrived, we've reached our destination. But when you look at the conversation, especially outside of Columbia, around Shane Beamer and this team entering the season, and you look at where things are right now, it is something that as a fan base, I think you should enjoy. And I think you should kind of enjoy being able to have the conversation about, hey, what happens if South Carolina wins out? What happens if all these other scenarios play out to where you have a chance to actually make the committee make a decision? And to me, that's what it comes down to. Like, I don't know what has to happen for Carolina to be able to get in. I don't know if anybody does. But if you're in a position where you're South Carolina and you just want to make them have to make a tough decision. And, Chris, as I go out to you now, man, what was your reaction to South Carolina being 21st? And do you think do you think we learned something? Because I kind of think we did. Do you think we learned something from the fact that they put South Carolina ahead of LSU and didn't just by default put LSU ahead of South Carolina because of the head-to-head?
Yes. I do think we learned something. And it's not anything that you can say we learned definitively. But here's my big picture takeaway, and then I'll unpack it. The committee has now opened the door for there to be inconsistencies in their process. Now, on one hand, if you're South Carolina, you may worry about that. And you say, well, hey, because we know, Wes, the baseline, South Carolina has to win out. They're not getting in with 4 losses or 5. Like, they have to win out. And they probably need some style points. But let's just start. They have to win out. We all know that. That's your starting point. But you're sitting there going, what does it mean if South Carolina does? And you may worry. You made a great point. You may say, well, LSU is kind of on the bubble. They're in the top 25. They've also got 3 losses, and they beat South Carolina. So maybe the committee looks at that and says, well, LSU's in. But they didn't do that. South Carolina wasn't in the first release of these rankings. So if you're a Gamecock fan, that may cause you to worry. Hey, we're 5-3. Seems like maybe we've done enough to sneak into the top 25. Maybe the committee just doesn't like us. Maybe they're just not as high on us. But now you're in, and now you're at 21. You're in striking distance. You're in range to be considered, right? I go to what Ward Manuel said, the AD at Michigan. He's the chair of the selection committee for the college football playoff. And he was asked, thankfully, very specifically about ranking South Carolina ahead of LSU. And in doing that, I think he gave us a couple little nuggets that this thing has some openness. Because, Wes, in doing that, he didn't talk about South Carolina's, what are the three metrics that they use? The strength of schedule, the game control. There's one more in there. He didn't talk about any of those. Instead, what he said is, since that game, LSU's had a couple tough losses, and these teams are going in opposite directions, and South Carolina's been impressive, kind of paraphrasing that last part. And so now you're sitting there, Wes, looking at it going, all right, the committee is considering things like the eyeball test. They're considering trajectory. And so now that doesn't necessarily mean that if South Carolina is 9-3 and they look impressive and they win 6 straight games, that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to get in. But that does signal that the committee does look at those things, right? To where if South Carolina finished this season on a 6-game winning streak with at least 3 blowouts, and especially if some of the other teams that are in that top 12 have another loss or look kind of cruddy or both down the stretch, maybe they look around and say, hey, I know South Carolina's got 3 losses, but let's look at their trajectory. Let's look at what type team they are. Let's dive into the metrics that they do have. In the 3 main metrics that the College Football Playoff Committee says they look at, South Carolina is top 8 in 2 of them, and they're number 14 in another one with 3 games left. So the point is, what I took away, Wes, last night was actually kind of encouraging for South Carolina. Again, they got to win out, but to me it does signal that they're not just looking only at the stats, only at the win and loss record. There's a baseline of something you have to do or not do there, but I just thought it kind of opened the door there.
Yeah, and what it also tells us, and, I was curious, Chris, to see how the committee would see Missouri. And because to me, they have a record where you're saying, oh, yeah, this is a top 25 team. If you start to kind of dive into it, and obviously the Vegas power ratings or whatever that they use to set lines don't really have them as a top 25 team because they're almost a 2-touchdown underdog to South Carolina this week. So, but my point, if you're South Carolina, you have Clemson sitting 1 step ahead of you at 20, and you have Missouri 2 spots behind you at 23. So you kind of do have an opportunity to at least get a couple of wins over 2 fringe top 25 teams by the very same committee that's going to be determining this thing's view. So, I think that's valuable. You're sitting there. You kind of hope some of these other teams will just eliminate each other along the way and that you just keep pushing. I was curious. I thought, even though, like we've seen this committee now kind of correct itself in a way, like moving, I guess, BYU jumping up. I was curious to see, was there a world where this committee said, man, Carolina just blew out a Vandy team that nobody else has really blown out this year? Like, was there a world where they might overcorrect or try to correct themselves a little bit and move Carolina up into the top 20, more like 19 or 18 range? I thought that was maybe the limit of where they could go. I think it is worthwhile to note that while they did not do that, they didn't just sneak South Carolina in at 24 or 25. You are sitting there at 21. It's a tall task, I think, to put yourself in a position, because you don't just have to be a top 12 team. It's got to match up with the rules of this college football playoff bracket as well. Georgia is a top 12 team, but they're not in the top 12 for the college football playoff bracket.
I was going to say, technically, you really should shoot for 11th, because if you assume the G5 representative is going to be outside the top 12, which Boise State is as of right now. You could be 12th like Georgia and be on the outside looking in. And Chris, remember what I said yesterday when we were talking about this, that if Carolina was 20th or 21st, I might think there's a pathway. Well, they are sitting at 21st, and it's going to take some chaos to unfold, but it's not outside the realm of possibility.
Well, and that's kind of the point I'm getting at, is that it looks like in the selection process there's a little chaos. If you're Carolina, you want the human element, right? You want them to look at the numbers in a certain way, and that certain way is you want them to look at game control, strength of schedule. What's the other one, Tyler? I couldn't
strength
come up
of
with
record. Basically,
yeah, there you go.
How you
Strength of
performed
schedule,
against what they deem your schedule to be, basically.
You want them to look at those because those are, I think Carolina's 8th, 7th, and 14th in those right now. You want them to look at that and go, that's impressive. You want them to look at the 3 losses, assuming you stay there, of course, and you want them to say, well, those 3 losses, you want them to view those in the best possible light, to kind of ignore the 3 losses, right? And then you want them to pull the eyeball test, the trajectory test. So you want that chaotic human element. Wes, you brought up BYU. That was another one that perked my ears up. BYU was said to, the justification for moving them up 3 spots was that they had beaten some top 25 teams, not recently, but the win last week was cited. Well, that win last week, they squeaked out on a controversial call against a 4-4 Utah team who's now 4-5. So you're going, wait a minute, Then, on the other hand, Tennessee stayed put, kind of controversial. What was the reason given? Well, Tennessee's only got 1 loss. It was a 5-point loss to Arkansas. But the reason given there was, well, they kind of struggled on offense, and they were real inconsistent in the first half of the season, right? So right there you're going, all right, the committee is they're doing a little bit of picking and choosing. So, again, if you're Carolina, you actually probably like that because you want them to look at Carolina at the end of the year. If you can go 9-3, you want them to go 6-game winning streak, tough schedule, young quarterback at the beginning of the year. Quarterback was banged up, missed time. They're playing their best ball at the end of the year. Yeah, they're one of the best 12 teams. That's what you want them to do. And again, I think you don't know for sure. None of this is for sure. There's a few teams in there that if they stay on their current course, will 100% be in, right? But there are a few that there are some questions about, and Carolina's one of those, and they are one of the more fringe questions. But I just think, guys, that they're, based on what we've seen, especially this week with some of the moves made and the justifications, I do think there's a path there.
I also think it helps out South Carolina and the SEC as a whole that Miami lost this weekend, dropped all the way to the 9th spot, where now you're looking at the ACC, which, assuming it's going to be Miami and SMU playing for the championship, as probably a one-bid league where the champion goes, as all champions do, to get into the playoff. But the second team, whoever finishes runner-up and the loser of the championship game, probably not getting in. Same thing could be said for the Big 12 as well. So opening up an extra at-large opportunity for a potential SEC team is something else that could certainly benefit South Carolina as well. I want to dive more into that conversation that you're bringing up a bit about BYU and Indiana, who both jumped over Tennessee last night. We'll get into the comments of what Ward Manuel, the CFP chair, said last night on why that move was made and what it can mean going forward for the rest of these rankings. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Wednesday here on The Game.
All right, y'all, you know it. This show and every single episode of the Gamecock Central Takeover presented by our friends over at Firehouse Subs. Check out, if you haven't already, the new Thanksgiving turkey sub. Available now through the end of November. It is Thanksgiving on a sub, complete with carved turkey breast slice, dressing, cranberry sauce, and mayo, served hot again on a toasted sub roll. Guests can enjoy all the flavors of Thanksgiving on a sub by ordering ahead with the Rapid Rescue to go, or just head on over to firehousesubs.com. Again, the easiest way to do it, though, make sure you have the app. Hopefully, if you've been listening to the show, you already have the app and you can go ahead and order it right now. But if not, go ahead, head on over to the App Store, type in Firehouse Subs, download it now, set up an account, and then you're going to get points every single time you order so that you can trade them in for free food later on. Also, Hot Sauce Bar is back. Add some flavor to any sub when you dive in, or pick up with a ton of options there from Firehouse Subs.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Wilson, Chris, along with you on this Wednesday morning, talking about the latest college football playoff top 25 that came out last night against Carolina, coming in at the number 21 spot. The controversy, though, comes towards the top of the rankings as Indiana moves up to number 5, BYU up to number 6, Tennessee staying at 7, as both those teams did end up jumping past them. And getting into these comments from Ward Manuel, who is the CFP chair for the committee this season, was asked about why those teams did end up jumping over Tennessee. Now, this was not a TV interview because they were doing the little in-cut between the two basketball games last night, but he said, I can say no to the inquiry to Tennessee's quarterback, had nothing to do do with it. It really came down to the play last week of both Indiana and BYU, both winning big games on their schedule. Tennessee, the offense has struggled some in the second half of the season, now being consistent early in the year, and we just felt as a committee that at this time, Tennessee has been playing very well, and a close win against Michigan. But other than that, they've dominated everyone they played. BYU obviously undefeated, 2 wins against top 25 opponents at SMU and against Kansas State. And looking at that, as we assessed all the teams, we just felt Indiana and BYU earned the 5 and 6 slot, and Tennessee stayed where they're at. Now, the thing about Indiana and BYU, they're both undefeated. Indiana at 10-0, BYU at 9-0. Again, BYU has 2 wins over ranked opponents. Indiana does not have any as of right now. If you're just going to say, okay, they're undefeated teams, well, you value that higher than Tennessee's 1 loss to Arkansas in the season, that's fine. But last week they were behind Tennessee, and I don't think wins against subpar Michigan and Utah teams compared to Tennessee beating a hapless Mississippi State team without their quarterback for some of that game is warranted for them to just suddenly jump them in the standings.
Yeah, and I think, guys, this is some of what we've been talking about first segment, and now is both the beauty and also the downside, though, of having a committee versus just having the computers just saying, hey, here's a formula. It's the BCS formula, but we're plugging it into a new system. Boom. That's just what it is. And so you're going to have, like, on paper, the computers might say, hey, head-to-head is hugely important, so LSU should be ahead of South Carolina. A human is going to say, well, the Gamecocks have been blowing out teams the last 3 weeks. LSU just got smashed. South Carolina is the team that is playing the best right now. Now, when you look at BYU, I mean, they're a holding call away from being. Where would they be if they lost the game? They would have slid.
They're in the late teens probably.
Yes. A game which, by the way, since we are humans and not computers, we can see that their athletic director of Utah went into the press conference. He was so ticked off about this. Now, maybe it was the right call. I don't know. But I do think we are already in the territory, though, of there is an argument you can come up with for just about any decision you make. But here's the thing. It's kind of a thankless job. Like, there is going to be no perfect way to rank these teams. But I do think you would like a little bit of consistency from week to week in terms of, like did they listen to the general public on this? Like, there was some talk last week about where BYU was, was BYU too low last week? Like, are they listening to outsiders and the general reaction? Are they listening? I think that's my question, guys. Are they listening to the reaction to their rankings and then responding to them with the next set of rankings?
They're not supposed to, but it's very plausible that they are.
Yeah. I mean, I did think it, Wes, you mentioned it earlier. I mean, the way you put it was like correcting themselves. And I don't even know if you meant like, we got it wrong, we're going to correct, or like a combo, right? Like, hey, we probably should have, like South Carolina, we probably should have had them in, Let's maybe move them up a spot higher than we would have before. Even if it's just like human, like predisposition to do those things, just like subconscious. Or is it like the reaction, right? Like moving, people said we had BYU too low. They deserve to be higher. I did think it was weird that was the justification, because Ward Manuel went back to, well, they've been very impressive this season. He mentioned, I don't have their schedule in front of me, but some top 25 wins. It's like, yeah, those already happened. Utah was not a top 25 team. They were 4-4. They're not very good this year. And as you said, Wes, that game came down to the wire, a controversial call, which, of course, it was a controversial calls that is a primary reason why South Carolina is sitting here with 3 losses instead of 2, and probably either in the top 12 or knocking on the door, right? As opposed to being a little outside of it. So Indiana, on one hand, maybe you're looking at it saying, I don't know if Indiana should be that high. But on the other hand, they've played the schedule in front of them. They've won, and they've been very impressive doing so.
They're smashing people.
Yeah,
they're smashing people.
Outside
so it's like
Michigan this past weekend.
Yeah, I mean, they probably deserve to be in there.
Yeah, and of course, next week they're lining up for, assuming Ohio State wins this weekend against Northwestern, a 2-5 matchup taking on Ohio State next weekend, which will go a long way in deciding who's going to be in the Big Ten championship game coming up here in a couple weeks. I do think, Ward Manuel made mention of Nico, who was injured this past weekend against Mississippi State. A lot of questions on if he's going to be available this weekend against Georgia, with some of the reports coming out yesterday. And, of course, we're going to get the first injury reports across the conference coming out tonight. It begged the question in my mind. So that, as of right now, is a 7-12 matchup. And we know the committee has interesting opinions when it comes to not having your quarterback. Let's say Tennessee loses to Georgia by 3 points with the backup quarterback on the road in Athens. Can you penalize them for that? Because theoretically, you'd be able to say, okay, well, if Nico played, they probably win that game. And at the same time, how much do you, reward Georgia for beating a team in the top 10 without a starting quarterback? Like, there's a lot of chaos within this one game that could unfold based on whether Nico plays or not, in my opinion.
And guys, I'm glad. I mean, I'm glad I'm not having to make these decisions because they're. I don't know if there's a right answer. Is the scary part, and I wonder not just the penalties in the LSU South Carolina game, but how much did the committee weigh on top of the other things they're saying that South Carolina did not have Lenore Sellers at all in the second half of that game, if we're going to talk about quarterbacks.
Yeah.
I mean, that game, based on what you saw in the first half, that game is far, far different if you have a healthy Lenore Sellers in the second half. And I just wonder if the committee has just added up all those things and said, look, if they faced off again, we think South Carolina would probably beat LSU. But can that thought process be spread out to all the other games, or is that sort of a lot of times in these you're going to see a committee pick and choose kind of retroactively, like, hey, we have this team ahead. Well, here's the reason why. But then if you ask them, well, why is this other team ahead of this other team? They might give you, well, the metrics love that team.
Yeah.
And, so I don't know. I'll be curious, guys. So on top of Tyler's question, Tennessee, Georgia, how does that affect the thought process here? What's going to happen in the Big Ten, depending on these things? Indiana, as a non-name brand team, feels like one of those teams that will be more heavily punished for a loss than maybe these other. But what if Indiana beats Ohio State?
Or if they beat them convincingly?
Now Ohio State has 2 losses.
They're out.
Done?
I think they might be out.
It's an interesting question. Again, the fluidity week to week is not consistent so far, so we'll see what happens. Again, that game coming up not this weekend, but next weekend between those two teams.
Does Indiana have to beat Ohio State to be in?
I don't think they have to. If you have a close loss against Ohio State, I mean, that'll drop you a few spots, but I don't think you fall out of the top 10, assuming they're still able to finish 11-1. That would prevent them from going to the Big Ten championship game. But an 11-1 Indiana, with a close loss to Ohio State, I think should still be in my opinion. Again, I'm not on the committee, but that makes sense to me at least.
Yeah, should. I mean, but, again, they might decide. I agree with you, Wes. A lot of it's going to be the committee saying, right now we like this team. Let's justify it. Right now I don't like this team. Let's justify it. And you can always come up with justifications. Tyler, I know we're up against it. I want to pose a question about a team that you have a lot of knowledge about on the other side.
Okay.
Tennessee's opponent this weekend, Georgia. I want to know your thoughts on Georgia.
All right, we can do that. That's coming up next. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Wednesday here in the game.
All right, if you're looking for an outstanding, reliable, family-owned service right here in the Midlands to help you with your home's HVAC needs, you know who I'm going to recommend. It's our friends over at Krantz Cooling and Heating, KrantzCooling.com. That's Krantz with a K, Krantz, KrantzCooling.com. Cooling also has a K in there, or 803-672-3224. They do a lot of things out in the community. Shout out to our friend Justin Krantz. He is the general manager of Krantz Cooling since 1983. Family-owned and operated business. Air conditioning, heating, as you turn your heater back on at the house, indoor air quality, maintenance, repair, installation. They can do it all for you. Also, check out their Krantz Club, knowing that you have peace of mind with your heating and cooling system maintenance plan. KrantzCooling.com, 803-672-3224.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, Wes, and Chris along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. Reminder, we're going to be out at Gold Line Framing coming up tomorrow from 9 until noon, 511 12th Street in West Columbia. Combined CSs will be talking all things Carolina and Missouri ahead of Saturday's game. Then tomorrow night, 6 o'clock, Carolina calls with Coach Beamer and Todd Ellis right here on the game in Columbia and Myrtle Beach. That'll lead right into tip-off of women's basketball to take on Coppin State at 7 o'clock. Pregame coverage starting at our sister station, ESPN 1320 at 6:30 for that one as Dawn's crew looks to improve to 3-0 on the season. Get back on our conversation ahead of this weekend's matchup of games. Chris wanted to dive a little bit more into Georgia as they get set for a de facto elimination game in their own right, taking on Tennessee on Saturday.
Well, maybe you just answered the question that I was going to ask. Elimination game.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Georgia 7-2, 5-2 in the SEC. Their 2 losses are to Alabama in Tuscaloosa by 7 and to Ole Miss on the road, convincingly, 28-10. But 2 road losses, Tyler, against 2 teams that are viewed as being playoff-worthy teams at this time.
Right.
In terms of wins, they beat Texas, another playoff-worthy team. They beat Clemson in the opener. Clemson is, you got to still say, a fringe college football playoff team. You may say, Chris, they're not good. They're in the mix still, officially. So this is a team that has some quality wins. They have 2 losses that are quality losses. We're talking about South Carolina still being in the race at 9-3 if they could win out. So my question is, if Georgia wins out, if they don't win out, if they're 9-3, can they still make it? So you don't think so, Tyler?
It kind of goes back to what you guys were saying a little bit earlier with the almost the what have you done for me lately kind of thing, which again is not how it's supposed to be. But when you look at the way that South Carolina's trended, assuming that they would win out, that'd be all their last 6 games of the year winning and doing some of those in convincing fashion, compared to Georgia, who, again, had a bad loss on the road at Ole Miss last weekend. And if they lose to Tennessee with a backup quarterback this weekend, that makes it look, even worse. I just think the perception of where Georgia is as of right now compared to South Carolina, even if Georgia's wins are better, would probably put them behind them in the eyes of the people in that committee room. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying based on what they've told us so far through 2 weeks of ratings, that's probably how it would end up going. So again, they're on the outside looking in as of right now because of the way the bracket works, with Boise State occupying that 12th spot, being the Group 5 representative. So yeah, they have absolutely no margin for error. They have to win these next 3 games to get in my opinion.
Yeah. So, guys, here's the other part of this question: does Georgia, even though currently Georgia is not in,
right?
Technically. Does Georgia control its own destiny?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If they, we're talking semantics about, that they're not in right now, but if they keep winning, they're going to eliminate, and enough of the teams in front of them will eliminate themselves to where they're in, right? As a 2-loss.
If they did not have Tennessee on the schedule this weekend as a higher ranked team, I would have a little concern. But the fact that you have an opportunity to beat a team that is 5 spots ahead of you, which no matter who plays at quarterback, that's still a win against a top 10 team, is going to vault you up some kind of way. And there's going to be more teams in the top 10 that are going to lose because they're going to be playing each other over these next couple weeks. That takes care of itself, in my opinion. Again, if there was no other ranked teams on the schedule left for Georgia, I'd have a little concern. But again, you have the opportunity to correct yourself this weekend against Tennessee and then handle your business against UMass and Georgia Tech, which won't be easy. But again, still, you have your opportunities in front of you.
I mean, and so I thought Heather Dinich had a decent point on Pat McAfee this week, and essentially saying this phrase elimination game has been thrown around a lot. And it does sort of lose a little bit of the context of we don't know what other chaos is going to take place around a particular team. Yep. And her point was that, hey, do not count out 3-loss SEC teams. And she was not talking specifically about South Carolina. I thought she might go there. She did not. And she said, here's why. In the first 10 years of the college football playoff, there have been 13 3-loss teams ranked in the selection committee's top 10 on selection day. So obviously you're talking about a different way of determining, like back then it was just, hey, the top 4 are going, but still not that precedent is the end all be all, But it goes to show you there is a precedent. If you are a team that's playing a great schedule and you lose 3 games, there is a precedent for you to be way up there in terms of college football playoff committee. Now, she went on to say not all 3-loss SEC teams are going to be created equal, and basically said if Ole Miss loses a 3rd game, they're done. LSU, way down bottom of the barrel right now because of how they've played and in terms of other SEC teams. But her point is ultimately Georgia. Remember when we had Ryan from SEC?
McGee.
Yeah, Ryan McGee from SEC
Network.
Yeah, what's his show called?
Marty McGee.
Marty McGee.
Yeah.
And prior to the season, and we were like, tell us something nobody's really talking about. And he was like, guys, if you really looked at Georgia's schedule, is a 3-loss Georgia still in? I think it primarily is going to depend on what happens with a lot of the teams around them. Now, if Tennessee does not have their quarterback and still beats Georgia, the metrics are going to tell you that that's the same outcome.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
The brain of the human element is going to tell you Tennessee went into Athens and won without their starting quarterback. That maybe is the element to me that could eliminate UGA.
Fair point.
Yeah. And I think that's why, earlier we were talking about some of the negatives of having a committee. In some instances, there's positives, right? Ideally, you want them looking at data, but also using some common sense. And if you're one of these teams that will end up being on the bubble, like a 3-loss Georgia, like a 3-loss South Carolina, in those scenarios, you want them to look at both and use both, and you want them to use, whatever helps you the most, right? So, I guys am also, there's so many teams to be fascinated by, but I think Tennessee is another one, right? They're 8-1, they're 5-1 in the SEC. Their losses to an unranked team. Their wins, they did beat Bama. That's a good win for them. But, at the time, early season, oh man, beat NC State 51-10. That's the top 25 team. NC State's not good. Oh, it beat Oklahoma, number 15. I don't remember what they were ranked at the time. Preseason, I think they were number 15. Beat them by 10 in Norman. Huge game, huge win. Not that big of a win, right? So they've got the Bama win. What if Tennessee loses to Georgia this weekend, and then they are at 5-2 in the SEC, 8-2 overall. They got a UTEP non-conference game after, and then they play Vandy. A 2-win Tennessee team, 2-loss Tennessee team. Is the committee impressed with that or not? I don't know. It's just like we can look at it and say, well, they should think this and that, but the question to ask is, what will they actually think at that time? And I think there are so many, like you said earlier, Wes, so many factors. It always depends. A team can do X, but what is another team doing? What is happening in another conference? What are the situations? Are there style points involved? Like there are so many, I think different questions to answer. I think, look, we're sitting here talking about BYU out of the Big 12, right? And how they just moved up. Man, if you look at the Big 12, their next few games, Kansas, on the road at Arizona State, and Houston. And on one hand, it's very manageable. They could easily win all 3 of those games. But if you really dive into what Kansas has done this year, what Arizona State done, and what Houston's done, there's been some chaos. Like everybody's kind of beating everybody in the Big 12. I could see them dropping a game, or even 2. If they lose 2 games, they're out, I think. If they lose 1, then it becomes a question, right? So, and Wes, one more thing. I'll shut up. Going back to your point, you look at how they used to do the playoff and how they do it now. Heather Dinich's point, it's a great point. Now you have to factor in the conference champions as AQs, as automatic qualifiers. but you still have, another spot or two to play with. So lots of questions there to still answer.
Chris has questions. I got a question.
Okay.
Who wants to win a platter?
Oh, yes. Quickly, 834-446-100. Firehouse Subs tailgate platter right now. Caller number 5, 834-446-100. We'll come back and wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. More playoff conversation coming up next here on the game. Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West and Chris along with you on your Wednesday. Reminder once again, tomorrow we're going to be out at Gold Line Framing from 9 until noon. 511 12th Street in West Columbia, talking plenty of South Carolina and Missouri. We'll hear from Beamer. We'll hear from Eli Drinkitz as well, getting you set for Saturday's matchup. But continuing on the playoff conversation, go out to the left Chevrolet phone lines. Welcome in our guy, Casey from Gilbert. Casey, appreciate you hanging on the line and your patience. What's on your mind today?
Not much, man. You know, one of the hidden talents I have of being a father of 7 is patience. I have a lot of it. But, you know, the human eye test and the human element will always have to be in this. And I think that, with the most recent evidence of this is what happened to FSU against Georgia and then what Georgia did in the playoffs. You know, out of the SEC, these teams should be forced to play at least one or two SEC teams to prove that they are a good enough caliber team to compete. Because at the end of the day, they're trying to put a good product on TV. And that does go into the mindset of all of these decisions. And in the SEC is different. Our defense, if it's not ranked number 1, we go against NFL talent every single week, pretty much. Those other teams might go against 1 or 2 guys in their entire season. That is NFL talent. And that says something. It has to. So if Carolina's on a trajectory and other teams are losing, but we're doing it in the SEC, that should go into account. BYU, Boise State, honestly, if we play against them, I think we would destroy them, kind of like what Georgia did in the championship game. But that's just my thought. I hope we go. It could be an Ole Miss rematch is what I'd like to see to decide something. But that's just me. What do you fellas think?
Yeah, appreciate the call there. As always, Casey, 803-404-6100. And he brings up an interesting point. I go back to Dan Orlowski last night after the playoff rankings were released, tweeted out South Carolina would beat every team where they are up to at least the 12th spot, which is where Georgia is at as of right now. And quickly kind of running through that list of teams, that would include Boise State at 13, SMU at 14, already beat A&M at 15, Kansas State, Colorado, Washington, Louisville, and Clemson, who you're going to face here in a couple weeks. And again, this is a theoretical question at this point in time, but I look at all these matchups, especially with the way Carolina's defense plays, and say, yeah, I'd have a hard time saying any of those teams would be huge favorites against South Carolina necessarily.
Well, and as we've talked about, guys, the continued progress of this South Carolina offense, and particularly the running game, and then, of course, Lenora Sellers as a runner and passer, to where it's not just this defense. Like, they've played well on really all 3 phases of the game in recent weeks. So the South Carolina we've seen for the last month or so, absolutely. Like I agree. It's just you're going to sit here and wonder, where is the limit for the amount of SEC schools that the committee will put in? And I know they don't directly put in, some of this is decided by the kind of the process they've all agreed to. So even being top 12 does not get you in. You got to be, like Tyler said earlier, top 11. But, guys, there has to be a limit somewhere. I agree with him. There's going to be a couple of schools that get in that even you don't have to be a homer sitting here in Columbia. Like Vegas would probably say, hey,
sure,
this SEC team would beat that team or this team that gets in. That's going to happen. So a big part of this is going to be, where does the College Football Playoff Committee draw the line in terms of SEC programs that can get in, and how do they compare that to the Big Ten once their chaos starts as these teams are all playing each other?
Yeah, if you look at a couple things I saw on social this morning, just to kind of drive home how well South Carolina's playing lately. They got to keep it going. But Will Helms, who does a lot of analytics for us on Gamecock Central, since week 8, as South Carolina's offensive success rate and their explosiveness rate, both top 5 in the SEC. No other team is in the top 5 of both of those categories. So offensively, to your point, Wes, they've been coming along. That has really helped with their progression. I think, that's reflected in the scores of the past several weeks, and it's something that the committee is paying some attention to. How much attention do they end up paying? If you also dive into the metrics of, to go back to those 3 metrics earlier, strength of schedule, strength of record, game control, you go up and down those and you look at where South Carolina is compared to basically 16 through 20, maybe others too, but those in the middle who are a little bit more closer, who are closer to the top 12, South Carolina's better and markedly better in a lot of those categories. So, again, you got to win. To use your terminology, Wes, you got to force that decision. But there's some indicators there that there could be a discussion as we progress through this thing.
Well, Carolina's got another opportunity to beat a ranked team this coming weekend, taking on Missouri at home. We'll dive into all the aspects of that matchup coming up tomorrow. Again, we're out at Gold Line Framing from 9 until noon, 511 12th Street over there in West Columbia. Come by and see us. That'll do it for the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show, myself, Terry Ford, up next on your Wednesday here on The Game.
All right, guys, before I get out of here, let me tell you about our friends over at Classic Roofing. You can get more information. Just head on over to classicroofingsc.com or go ahead and give them a call, 803-590-7870. My friends Mac and Joe, they're going to take great care of you. And as the owners, chances are you're going to deal directly with one of them, which is one of the many advantages to you dealing and working with Classic Roofing. I have worked with them, had a great experience, me and my wife did, with our roof, and you can do exactly what we did. Go ahead and have them come out for a free estimate on your roof. Again, if you go to classicroofingsc.com, look in the upper right-hand corner, hit free estimate. You can go ahead and fill out a quick survey and send it in very quickly. They're going to come out to your home and let you know, A, are there any potential problem areas here?